Which one is better, the Nike Mercurial Superfly 5 or the new Nike... Is the new Superfly 6 all that great, or is the old Superfly... Just stay there. Just stay. What's going on, guys? Josh from soccerreviewsforyou.com bringing you a comparison video today between the old Nike Mercurial Superfly 5 and the new Superfly 6 Elite. What are the differences between the two, and I guess more importantly, which one do I think is better? All of those differences are going to be discussed in today's video. If you guys do enjoy the comparison series on this channel and perhaps want to see more, don't forget to support this video with a like and let me know which specific comparisons you'd like to see down below in the comments. Also, if you're new here watching for the first time, please hit that subscribe button for daily videos on all the latest and greatest soccer gear, including future comparisons. Before we even compare the two in regards to tech specs and performance features, I want to talk about the price. The original retail price of the Superfly 5 in a regular colorway in the firm ground variation, as I'm holding right here, was $300 US, whereas the new Superfly 6 Elite has actually seen a price decrease from the previous generation, retailing for $25 less at $275. So if you're talking about full retail, technically the new Superfly 6 is the better value. However, this is new and this is now old. They're not making the Superfly 5 anymore, so pretty much every store that's carrying these is going to be marking them down. If you can find them heavily discounted, it's still an awesome shoe even though it's no longer the latest model. However, if you're buying the two for the same amount of money, honestly, I would give the edge to the Superfly 6 Elite. As far as the uppers are concerned, both shoes are mid-cut, both shoes feature a Flyknit base, both have Nike skin coverings for that Flyknit base, and also feature ACC all conditions control. But what are the specific differences? In comparison to the Superfly 6, the big thing about the Superfly 5 upper that's just totally different is the speed rib texturing, the inclusion of flywire cables, and just the overall thickness. This is still going to offer a barefoot feel on the ball, but it's going to be a lot more heavily padded when you're comparing it directly to the Superfly 6 Elite, which I think compares more closely to something like the Superfly 4 or even a Mercurial Vapor model in terms of being a lot thinner and having a true pingy sensation. This, like I said, does offer that barefoot feel, but it has more thickness to it, and a lot of that has to do with the speed rib texturing, where basically there's a variation in the thickness where it's thinner, then thicker, then thinner, then thicker, basically in ribs all the way down the entire upper. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the added thickness due to the speed ribs, but the touch definitely doesn't suffer. It's just not overly thin. If you want a slightly more padded variation of the Superfly, you might prefer the Superfly 5 over the Superfly 6 in regards to overall touch. As far as the flywire cables are concerned, they're hidden within the speed rib texturing. They run from the base of the sole directly into the lacing system, with basically their functionality being the fact that when you tie those laces tight, it's grabbing your foot, especially through the midfoot and forefoot area, and helping to lock it in place. So from a responsive standpoint, and I guess the stability on offer from the upper when the laces are tied tight, you could make the argument that the Superfly 5 is slightly more responsive, although I would say the difference is pretty minimal in that regard. With the Superfly 6 upper, you're getting their new 360-degree Flyknit upper, and the reason why they're calling it that is because you can see the material technically wraps underneath the foot with its new split sole design. Honestly, that bottom part of the foot is not something that you feel whatsoever. It's more so there for the sake of looks. We'll get into that in just a second. As far as the upper itself is concerned though, it completely ditches the speed rib texturing, opting for a much thinner layer of Flyknit pretty much for the entire upper. So in terms of touch on the ball, there's almost no extra padding whatsoever, but you maintain the softness and general sock-like sensation that you also got from the Superfly 5 with its Flyknit upper. It's kind of a common characteristic of this particular material from Nike. You have a Nike skin covering on top, and you can see it does have somewhat of a rib texturing running the length of the shoe rather than directly across, so it's kind of the opposite of the Superfly 5 in that regard. However, that's just within the Nike skin, not within the actual Flyknit material itself, and it's pretty minimal, not something that you notice on the ball whatsoever, in my opinion. And really, other than that, the big difference is that these are just a lot thinner. You do miss out on the flywire cables here, but honestly, I think that not having the flywire actually makes for a slightly more comfortable and more natural sensation on your feet. I personally find the Superfly 6 Elite more comfortable than the Superfly 5. That not only has to do with the upper and lack of flywire cables, it also has to do with the change in shape of the upper itself, which we'll get to in just a second. So when it comes to uppers, for me, it's not even close. I much prefer the feel of the Superfly 6 upper. Side by side, you'll definitely notice that the collars are different. Although they have nothing to do with performance, I will say that the new construction of the Superfly 6, specifically in the heel area, is a lot more comfortable and simply easier to break in out of the box versus what we had on the Superfly 5 and the Superfly 4 before it. You're also going to notice that the collar is slightly shorter, modeled after the custom collar that we've seen Cristiano Ronaldo wear for the last 4 years on the Superfly 4 and Superfly 5. Is that slightly shorter collar really that noticeable in terms of how it feels or performs? Absolutely not. Basically, these are just extension pieces, but if you're buying a Superfly, you're pretty much stuck with them. Do I have a significant preference here? In regards to the collar, no, but in regards to the construction of the heel area, again, I find the Superfly 6 a lot more comfortable. One of the more noticeable changes from the Superfly 5 to Superfly 6 is going to be the sole plate, especially from a visual standpoint. Solid sole plate on the Superfly 5, split sole design, which we've seen in the past from the Mercurial line, on the Superfly 6. Although, despite looking very, very different, the two actually feel and perform almost exactly the same way. The Superfly 5 introduced what Nike calls a Nike plate sole plate, which essentially had an anatomic shaped base due to their new construction process that allowed them to make the sole plate entirely out of one single layer of material. So instead of the sole plate base being completely flat as it would be on pretty much any other shoe, it's got a little bit of a contoured shape in the forefoot area as well as in the heel. No real arch support or anything like that, but you sit slightly in the sole plate rather than directly on top of a flat surface. That actually makes a pretty significant difference in terms of giving you a very connected sensation to the shoe, as well as improving responsiveness because your foot's not going to easily slide on top of a flat surface since the surface isn't flat. As far as flexibility is concerned, I would say it's fairly average. The sole plate as a whole wasn't overly thin, it wasn't overly thick either, and honestly it felt pretty good. Not much to get used to. Maybe you'd notice that anatomic shape for the first 10 minutes or so of wearing them for the first time, but after that it ends up feeling very, very natural. And honestly, this was probably my favorite feature added to the Superfly 5 coming from the Superfly 4. Now, like I mentioned, the sole plate, despite looking a lot different than the Superfly 5, is almost exactly the same. The difference here is obviously the visual aspect, and essentially all they've done is they've taken that one-piece sole plate and they've broken it up into 3 individual pieces. So you have a sole plate base that runs from heel to toe, just like you'd find on any other shoe, split sole or not, but of course none of that sole plate is actually revealed on the outside of the shoe. You can see the Flyknit upper kind of just wraps underneath the foot, and then in the forefoot as well as in the heel, you have your stud plates. So that is the extra 2 pieces to make up a total of 3, and the stud plates are there simply to exist to hold the studs themselves. All this is really doing is just giving the shoe a slightly different look. And really, in terms of overall feel, you still get the anatomic sole plate base. I would say that it feels pretty much exactly the same as the Superfly 5. You're not going to notice any significant difference whatsoever. You might argue, and this is really if you're super nitpicky about stuff, that this has a slight bit of extra thickness to it because of the extra layers that they've added. But again, the difference is extremely minimal, and honestly, after about 2 minutes of wearing these things, they felt identical underfoot to what we had on the Superfly 5. So in regards to that anatomic sole plate and the performance benefit and I guess connected sensation that it has on offer, you're getting the exact same feel and the exact same benefit whether you go Superfly 6 or Superfly 5. So there's no winner here. In regards to stud patterns, specifically focusing on the firm ground stud pattern, again, the sole plate design makes them look drastically different. However, side by side, you'll notice that the firm ground stud pattern is 100% exactly the same. They have not changed a thing. And you'll notice when you wear these 2 shoes that the traction performance is identical as well. Yes, the sole plate construction is slightly different, but that has no impact on traction. A lot of people have this thing in their head that because you have exposed material through the midfoot rather than plastic, that it's going to have some kind of a traction issue. There's no traction from this, and there's no traction from this. That has nothing to do with traction. Traction comes from the studs, and you can see the layout in the forefoot and the layout in the heel is exactly the same as what we had before. The Mercurial line is known for having very aggressive traction. This was the first time we saw this new stud pattern introduced on the Superfly 5. They carried it over to the Superfly 6, and it still works just as good. If you're looking for the most aggressive firm ground stud pattern on the market right now, this is it. Now these are both Mercurials after all, so you expect them to be relatively light, and given the design changes that they've made from Superfly 5 to Superfly 6, maybe there's a big weight difference between the two, but that's not actually the case at all. The Superfly 5 in a size 9 US weighs in at 6.7 ounces, whereas the Superfly 6 Elite in a size 9.5 US, so half a size larger, please keep that in mind, weighs in at 7 ounces. So you're talking about a weight difference between these two of 0.3 ounces, although this is a slightly bigger shoe, which does account for that little bit of extra weight. So in terms of a weight difference between the two, there almost isn't any at all. Maybe the Superfly 5 is like 0.1 ounces lighter, but that's not something you're gonna be able to feel in hand or on feet whatsoever. So if you're trying to decide between the two based on the weight difference, there quite simply isn't one. They're both very, very lightweight when you're wearing them. Despite everything that we talked about so far, once you actually have the two shoes on your feet, that's where you're gonna notice the major differences, and all of those differences are pretty much in the upper as well as the overall shape. The sole plate, like I talked about, despite looking a lot different, they feel pretty much exactly the same, whether it's Superfly 5 or Superfly 6, because it basically is made up of all the same elements. As far as the uppers are concerned though, you're definitely gonna notice, especially once broken in, that the Superfly 6 upper is a lot thinner and just has less padding to it overall, but to me the big difference is going to be the shape. They've definitely made the new generation of Mercurials, not just the Superfly 6 Elite, a little bit wider than what it was in the previous generation that we had with the Superfly 5. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Well, it really depends on what you like. For me personally, being slightly flat-footed, I personally find this new shape to the Mercurial to be a lot more comfortable overall, although I do know people who do have the Superfly 5 and the new Superfly 6, and they kind of have the opposite feeling. They prefer the overall fit of the Superfly 5, being that it is slightly lower volume and slightly more narrow. Again, it just depends on your specific foot shape. But for me personally, I prefer the overall comfort level and shape of the new Superflies, but that's something that happens with every new generation of Mercurials. They always tweak the shape a little bit. Some people like the new shape, some people like the older shape. It's kind of the same situation here. As far as width is concerned, again, you're gonna have more width through the midfoot, forefoot, and even in the toe box area, I would say, with the new generation of Superfly 6 versus what we had in the 5. But the difference, again, is still fairly minor. They both fit like Mercurials, really, really tight. So if you have super wide feet, I wouldn't necessarily say that the Mercurial line in general is a great option. And again, the heel area, I really like the new construction in the heel of the Superfly 6. It's not something that you can necessarily see when I have the shoes on my feet, but once you actually have the opportunity to try them on, especially if it's brand new pairs, you'll definitely notice that the fit and feel in the heel area is a lot more comfortable out of the box on the Superfly 6. And then the last thing to talk about is sizing. That has not changed whatsoever. Pretty much every generation of Mercurial has run true to size, and that is still the case here with the new Superfly 6. Whether you're going Superfly 5 or Superfly 6, going true to size is what I would recommend. So in conclusion, I really don't think there's much that separates these two from a performance standpoint. I think a lot of people assume that whenever a new model comes out that it's gonna blow the old one out of the water, but that is not the case at all. If you're asking what my personal preference is, I personally prefer the Superfly 6 Elite for a couple different reasons. One being that they have tweaked the shape a little bit, like I talked about, where it is slightly wider. I find it to be a lot more comfortable, at least for my foot shape, in comparison to the Superfly 5, but that's not to say I couldn't get a comfortable fit out of the shoe. I also prefer the new construction of this Flyknit upper in that it is thinner and does offer a more true barefoot sensation in comparison to what we had from the Superfly 5. For me though, the big difference is going to be that construction in the heel. This has a construction that is more along the lines of a low-cut shoe, and I just find it to be significantly more comfortable overall, either when you're breaking them in or after they've been broken in. Just in general, I think the new Superfly 6 Elite is more comfortable, at least for me personally. But if you prefer something that has a little bit more padding to it, if you prefer something that has a slightly narrower, lower profile fit in general, and you just like the overall look of the shoe, the Superfly 5 is just as capable from a performance standpoint as what you can get from the new Superfly 6. So my preference would be the new one, but if you can only afford the older one, which is now on sale, by all means go for it. There is no bad option. There is no wrong choice here. Anyways, guys, that is it for my comparison. If you're looking for more info on either of these two shoes, there are links to the review pages on my website down below in the description, where you will also find buy it now links with exclusive SR4U coupon codes, where you'll be able to pick these up below their normal retail price. Or if you just do a quick search on my channel, you'll find all kinds of other Superfly 5 and Superfly 6 related videos. So be sure to check that out if you're looking for more info. Other than that, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to support it with a like. If you have any questions, as always, leave them down below in the comments and I'll do my best to get an answer out to you as soon as I possibly can. Subscribe if you haven't already for daily videos on all the latest and greatest soccer gear. You can find all my social media information linked down below in the description as well. Other than that, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. As always, thanks for watching.